The training floor was lit white, the rubber mats black under harsh overheads. 20 applicants stood in a line. Caleb Reed stood at the end of it, flannel shirt rolled to his forearms, hands calloused from work. Reggie Tank Hollister stepped to the center of the floor, 6'5" and 280 pounds, and pointed at him. "This is the bodyguard tryout, handyman. Plumbing's the other building." The room laughed. Behind one-way glass, Marcus Bryant folded his arms and nodded for the match to begin. Tank charged. 1 step, 2. Caleb didn't move back. He shifted his weight and lowered his right shoulder. Behind the glass, Vivian Hale stood up. The water glass in her hand stopped halfway to her mouth. What happened in the next 4 seconds would cost one man his career, one man his freedom, and rewrite the life of a man no one in that room had bothered to look at twice. To understand how it ended that way, the day has to be walked from its beginning. 6 hours earlier, in a small rented house on the edge of Greenwich, Caleb Reed warmed milk on a low burner and arranged apple slices in the shape of a star on a yellow plate. Lily padded into the kitchen barefoot, hair still half-braided from the night before, a paperback copy of Charlotte's Web tucked under one arm. She climbed onto the chair across from him and propped the book against the salt shaker. "Wilbur is being dramatic again," she said. "He's 8, Caleb said. "He's allowed." "I'm 8. You're different." She considered that for a moment, then nodded and ate her toast. On the refrigerator, behind a magnet shaped like a frog, an old hospital invoice had yellowed at the edges. Sarah Reed, the name on it read. Caleb folded it once and slid it into his back pocket without looking at it. He dropped Lily at the elementary school on Maple. He held her a little longer than usual at the curb. She didn't ask why. She patted his cheek, said, "Drive safe, Daddy," and ran. The Ford F-150 was a 2009. The driver's seat had a split he kept covering with a beach towel. He drove east, through the long shaded streets where the houses grew larger, and the lawns longer, and turned at the stone gate marked Whitmore Estate. The training facility sat behind the main house, in a converted carriage building. Don Walsh met him at the side door, gave him a short nod, and pointed him to the waiting area without saying anything that would link them. 20 men sat or stood in the room. Ex-Navy, ex-SWAT, 2 men who looked like refrigerators with arms. Caleb took the last chair, set his hands on his knees, and breathed. Marcus Bryant walked through, sized him up in one glance, and leaned toward his assistant. "Walsh's charity case," he said, just loud enough. 5 minutes. He's out." Caleb didn't turn his head. A door opened at the front. Vivian Hale walked in, followed by Eleanor Whitmore, who looked all of her 70 years and none of them at the same time, and Charles Pemberton, the family attorney, who carried a tablet under one arm. Vivian's voice was even. 3 rounds. Records. Situational reflex. Free sparring. We move at my pace. Questions get asked at the end. She began reading names. When she reached Caleb's, she paused for half a second on the page. The file in her hand was thin. Handyman, self-employed, U.S. Army veteran, honorable discharge, 2022. The rest of the service record was sealed. She looked up. Caleb met her eyes and gave one small nod. In the first round, his answers were short and clean. Pemberton asked him why he wanted the job. Caleb said, "My daughter needs medication. I need stable hours and good insurance." Eleanor wrote something on her tablet. Marcus leaned forward. "Mr. Reed, our principal is one of the wealthiest women in New England. We need real protectors, not handymen looking for health care." The room went still. Caleb didn't react. He looked at Marcus the way a man looks at a closed door he is already on the other side of. Vivian said softly, "Marcus." "Procedure." She moved to the next applicant. In her own office 20 minutes later, she pulled up a secure terminal and typed a name. "Pull anything you can on Caleb Reed's service record. Sealed file. Use the DC channel." She set the phone down. Her fingers tapped once on the desk. The second round used a small mock room. Leather chair, glass coffee table, a hired actor in reading glasses pretending to scan a newspaper. Each applicant wore a single earpiece and stood by the door. The room's speakers played scenarios on a delay. The first 2 applicants responded well enough. They were a beat late, but technically correct. Caleb stepped in before the audio prompt had finished. Before the staged sound of glass breaking had fully crossed the speakers, he had crossed the room, pulled the actor to the floor, and placed himself between the actor and the simulated window. His right hand was on the man's shoulder, ready to move him sideways. 2 seconds, beginning to end. He looked up at the observation glass. Threat neutralized. Behind the glass, Vivian did not move, Eleanor tilted her head a quarter-inch toward her. That wasn't reaction, she said. That was anticipation. A soft chime sounded on the laptop in front of Vivian. She glanced at the screen. Caleb J. Reed, 75th Ranger Regiment, 2008 through 2022. Master Sergeant. 2 Bronze Stars, 1 with Valor. Mac P Level 4 Instructor. Honorable discharge. Compassionate. Spouse terminal illness. Vivian's expression did not change. She closed the laptop with the same hand she had opened it with. Marcus, seated 2 chairs over, never saw the screen. Lucky reflex, he said. Anyone can flinch in the right direction. Vivian didn't answer him. She stood up, walked into the hallway, and asked an aide to send Mr. Reed to her. They stood by a tall window on the marble corridor. Mr. Reed, she said, your file is thin in the wrong places. It's enough for the job, ma'am. Ranger Regiment. MACP instructor. That isn't handyman work. He didn't answer right away. A moment passed. That was a different man. I came home for my daughter. Does Mr. Bryant know? No, ma'am. And I'd prefer he doesn't. Why? Because the men who use what I know wrong are the men I came home to keep my daughter away from. I'd rather see who he is before he sees who I am. Vivian held his gaze for 2 seconds. Round 3 is in 15 minutes. She turned and walked back the way she came. Caleb let out a slow breath. In the surveillance room 2 floors away, Don Walsh saw Caleb's name light up green on the round 3 board. He spoke under his breath. To nobody. Hold the line, brother. He glanced across the bullpen at the closed door to Marcus Bryant's office. Inside that office, Marcus held a phone to his ear. His voice was low. It's getting close. Set Tank loose in round 3. I want him broken in front of the board. Then I want him out of the building. He hung up. On his desk, beneath a stack of contract drafts, lay a thick envelope with a small embossed seal. Mercer Holdings, Security Division. On the sparring floor, Caleb tied his work boots tighter and stood up. Across the mats, Tank Hollister was rolling his shoulders and smiling at the ceiling. He smacked one fist into the other palm and laughed at his own joke with 2 of the other applicants. Caleb watched him without moving. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just watched. The 3rd round was free sparring with protective gear. Marcus took the clipboard himself and called Caleb's name first. Across from him, he called Tank. Vivian's head turned. That isn't the rotation we agreed on. Director's call, Marcus said. Let's see what the handyman is made of. Eleanor sat behind her, hands folded, saying nothing. She wanted to watch how Vivian handled Marcus. Tank walked onto the mat, swinging his arms, grinning. Try not to bleed on the mat, old man. A few of the applicants laughed. One did not. A young ex-Marine named Jenkins took a half-step back and folded his arms. The chime sounded. Tank charged the same way he had charged in the moment that began this story. 1 step. 2. 3. Caleb read his weight distribution from the 2nd step, waited for the transition point, and moved. He shifted off the center line, hooked Tank's wrist with his right hand, leveraged his hip under Tank's chest, and rode Tank's own momentum down onto the rubber mat. The technique was Modern Army Combatives, Level 4. It was clean, controlled, and slow enough that anybody who had ever trained the same way would have recognized it instantly. Tank hit the mat hard, but not damaging. The breath went out of him. Caleb stepped back. His hands fell to his sides. He glanced at the observation glass. Match? The room was completely silent. Then a single pair of hands began to clap. Eleanor Whitmore. Pemberton followed. Vivian did not clap. Her eyes had already changed before Tank hit the mat. Tank rolled up to one knee. His face was red, and he was not done. He launched at Caleb a 2nd time without the chime, without protocol. Caleb pivoted off his hip again and put him back down, gentler than the first time. Stand down, Caleb said. His voice was level. Marcus slammed his palm on the table. That's a foul, unauthorized technique. Vivian turned her chair to face him directly. Marcus, free sparring means free sparring. Sit down. It was the first time in the morning she used her hard voice. Marcus sat. Tank pushed himself to standing. He breathed for a long moment, staring at Caleb. Then he did something nobody in the room expected. He held out a hand. Where'd you train, brother? Caleb took the hand, shook it once, short, around. Tank nodded once and walked off the mat. He didn't look at Marcus on the way out. The lunch break came. Caleb sat on a bench outside in the garden behind the carriage building, opened a brown paper bag, and unwrapped a chicken sandwich. He set an apple beside it on the bench. Vivian walked past, slowed, and set a bottle of water on the bench beside him without breaking her stride. "You're not on the rotation by accident anymore." She walked on. Caleb looked at the bottle. The corner of his mouth lifted just a little. Don Walsh came down the path a minute later and sat on the bench beside him, looking forward, not at him. "Marcus is going to play dirty this afternoon. He has a card to play. He always does. This one's bigger than the others. Be ready." Don stood and walked off. Caleb finished the apple, stood up, and dusted his jeans. The afternoon session moved to the main meeting room of the house. Walnut table. New England landscapes in heavy frames. A chandelier turned low. The 5 remaining applicants stood at one end. The board sat at the other. Caleb stood at the back of the line. Marcus set a thick folder on the table. "Before we proceed, the board should see this. Mr. Reed has a record." The folder held a police report, 3 years old. Caleb had been briefly detained after an incident outside a bar in Bridgeport. No charges filed. Marcus read aloud from a summary page, slow and clear. "Violent altercation. 2 men hospitalized. We cannot have this profile near Miss Whitmore." Eleanor said nothing. Vivian's expression stayed perfectly still. Her fingers tightened a quarter of an inch on the arm of her chair. She had known about Caleb's service record since that morning. She let Marcus dig his hole deeper. Caleb did not deny it. He spoke slowly. 3 years ago, 2 men followed my wife and daughter from a parking lot. My wife was on chemotherapy. They got close enough to grab my daughter's wrist. I removed them. The district attorney dropped the case because the security camera footage backed me up. The file Mr. Bryant has does not include that footage." Marcus smiled thinly. "Convenient story. It's a true one. The footage is on file with Bridgeport PD. Evidence locker. Case number 2022-4471. Call them." Pemberton was already pulling his phone from his jacket pocket. "I'll verify in 10 minutes. The room held its silence. Vivian looked at Marcus for a long time. Long enough that he looked away. "Marcus," she said quietly, "if that footage exists and you knew about it, this is a problem. If it exists and you didn't know, this is also a problem. Either way, this is a problem." Marcus opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Pemberton returned 10 minutes later. The footage was real. The file Marcus had brought into the room had been edited. The exonerating portion had been removed. Eleanor spoke for the first time that afternoon. "Vivian, please continue the evaluation. Marcus, please remain seated until we adjourn." Caleb was offered a seat. He pulled out the chair and sat straight. Vivian's eyes met his across the table for half a second. There was no smile in them. There was something else. Recognition, quiet recognition. Caleb pulled out his phone under the table and read a text from Lily. She had gotten an A on her spelling test. She had sent a small yellow star. He put the phone away and rested his hand on the table. His breathing slowed. At 5 o'clock, Vivian announced that the session would adjourn for the day. The board would meet privately and return with a decision in the morning. Caleb was free to go home. Before he left the room, she stepped near him and held out a small white card with a phone number handwritten on it. "If anything feels off tonight, call this. Anything." He took the card. He nodded. Across the table, Marcus watched him the way a man watches a trap that has just closed on his own finger. In his head, the second plan had already begun to move. At 6 o'clock that evening, Caleb walked into his small rented house, and Lily met him in the hallway with crayon on her cheek. "Look what I drew." She held up a sheet of paper. "It's a tree. That's a beautiful tree. It's our tree. From when we go camping. We haven't been camping yet. Then we should." He kissed the top of her head. He cooked pasta. He did not burn it. They sat at the small kitchen table and ate together, and he read the next 2 chapters of Charlotte's Web out loud while she leaned on his arm. He carried her to bed. He kissed her forehead, switched off the lamp, and closed the door slowly so it would not creak. He sat on the small back porch with a cup of black coffee. The yellow porch light buzzed gently. The yard smelled like late autumn. He thought about Vivian. He thought, more precisely, about how she had said his unit name in the corridor that morning, and then put the conversation away like a coat she was hanging up in her own closet. At 9 o'clock, his phone vibrated on the porch railing. Don Walsh. "I can't say much on the phone. Eleanor leaves the estate at 0700 tomorrow for an event at the Greenwich Country Club. Marcus is arranging something. I don't know the shape of it. It's wet. Got it. Stay safe." He hung up. He stood for 10 seconds and then called the number on the white card. She picked up on the first ring. She had been waiting. "Talk." He told her. in 8 short sentences. "Come to the estate at 05:30, she said. "East Gate. Contractor entrance. Don't tell anyone." "Yes, ma'am." "Vivian." Off the clock, she hung up. Across town, in the upstairs office of his home, Marcus Bryant was on his own phone. His voice was low and tight. "Move it up. Tomorrow morning, before the board reconvenes. Make it look like an opportunity." He hung up. On the desk in front of him sat a printed photograph of Eleanor Whitmore and the morning's itinerary. In a smaller apartment on the other side of Greenwich, Don Walsh sat at the edge of a hospital-style bed, smoothing the blanket over his wife Marlene's legs. She had multiple sclerosis. The fluorescent hallway light through the open doorway made everything pale. "You've been quiet for months, honey," she said softly. "Tomorrow it ends. One way or another." She didn't ask what. She just touched the back of his hand. At 5:25 the next morning, Caleb parked at the contractor entrance. A thin fog hung over the asphalt. Don was already there in a black jacket. He opened the side gate without speaking and led Caleb down a service hallway. Vivian was waiting in her office. She had not slept. She was wearing the same gray blazer from the day before, and there was a third cup of coffee at her elbow. A single desk lamp was on. The windows behind her were still dark. She opened the door. She nodded once at Don, who stepped inside behind Caleb. For the first time in 2 days, 3 people stood in the same room who all understood the shape of what was about to happen. She closed the door. "Sit down. Both of you. I have 6 months of files to walk you through, and we have 90 minutes. She opened the bottom drawer of her desk and pulled out a stack of folders and a small black thumb drive. She set them on the desk between them. "6 months ago," she said, "I noticed irregularities in our security contract renewals. Marcus was skimming about 4% per quarter, routed through shell vendors. I had 2 choices: fire him immediately and lose the trail, or let it run and build a criminal case. I chose the case." She looked at Don. "I asked Don to keep parallel records. His non-disclosure agreement is with the estate, not with me. Internal reporting to the Director of Security is part of his job description. He hasn't violated anything. We've been building this file together for half a year." Don's shoulders eased for the first time in months. 3 weeks ago, the pattern changed. Vivian continued. "Marcus received a payment that didn't fit the skimming pattern. Too large. Wrong source. The source was Mercer Holdings." She placed a single bank statement on the desk. Caleb read the name on the wire. "Mercer. Victor Mercer. My ex-husband. He has been trying to pressure the Whitmore Group out of a Manhattan real estate deal for 2 years. If anything happens to Eleanor while I am Director of Security, my standing collapses, the deal collapses, and Mercer takes the property at half the market price. This was personal. Yes, he's using Marcus to get to me through Eleanor. I've known about the payment for 3 weeks. I haven't moved, because if I warn Eleanor now, Mercer pulls back and waits. He never gets caught. He just tries again in 6 months with somebody else. I needed him to act." Caleb nodded slowly. "You were waiting for him to commit." "Yes. And then yesterday morning, you walked in. Ranger Regiment. MAC-P instructor. The man Marcus needed least in the building at the worst possible time for him. He panicked. He accelerated the timeline. That is why this is happening this morning instead of next quarter." Caleb sat with that for a moment. "I need you on Eleanor's detail this morning," she said. "Off the books. Officially, the board has not made a decision. Unofficially, you are the only person in this building I trust with her life." "Yes." For the first time, she smiled. It lasted half a second. "Vivian." "Yes, Vivian." At 6:45, Caleb pulled a plain black jacket over his shirt and clipped a security earpiece into his ear. He climbed into the front passenger seat of the armored SUV Eleanor would ride in. The 2 other guards on the detail were both Marcus's men. Vivian followed in a chase vehicle 3 minutes behind. Pemberton had quietly arranged for Greenwich PD units to position themselves along the planned route. Eleanor sat in the rear seat. Her voice was very steady. "Vivian briefed me 10 minutes ago, Mr. Reed. Then please keep your head below the window line, ma'am." She slid down without protest. On the route to the country club, Caleb read the traffic in the side mirrors. 2 black sedans. No company plates. They had picked the convoy up from the estate gate and were holding 3 vehicles back. He pressed the earpiece. 2 tails. 3 vehicles back. Coordinated. Vivian's voice came through clean. "Acknowledged. Backup ETA 2 minutes." The convoy turned onto a quieter stretch of road that ran past a stand of red maples just beginning to drop their leaves. The two sedans accelerated, swung wide, and forced the SUV onto the shoulder. In the front passenger seat, the second guard reached for his phone. Not his weapon. His phone. It was the confirmation signal. Caleb had been waiting for it. In half a second, he hooked the man's wrist, took the phone, drew the man's sidearm from its holster, and placed the weapon flat on his own thigh. "Sit still," he said quietly. The doors of the two sedans opened. 4 men stepped out, dressed in black, tactical balaclavas down, suppressed pistols held in low ready. They were not amateurs. They moved in a paired formation, 2 and 2, fanning out from the lead vehicle. Caleb shoved Eleanor flat onto the rear floorboards of the SUV and dropped his own body between her and the side glass. He keyed the earpiece. 4 hostiles, 2 vehicles, professional, engaging, need backup hot, backup ETA 70 seconds, Vivian said. Hold. He did not step out into the open road. He cracked the rear passenger door 6 inches, rolled low to the asphalt, and shifted his cover behind the SUV's right rear wheel well. The armored chassis was the only thing on the road he could trust to stop around. The first pair came forward from the lead sedan. Caleb counted the angles. He waited for the lead man's weight to shift onto his front foot, and he fired once. The round struck the man's thigh. The man dropped. The second man swung wide. Caleb shifted his cover by 1 vehicle length, took the shoulder, and the second man's pistol clattered to the road. 2 of the 4 were down. 2 were still moving. The remaining pair did not advance. They split to opposite shoulders of the road and began suppressive fire against the SUV's windows. Suppressed rounds made dull mechanical sounds against the armored glass. Thup, thup, thup. The glass cracked but did not give. Eleanor stayed flat on the floorboards, hands over her head. Caleb did not return fire wildly. He counted his magazine. He held position. He waited. The second of Marcus's guards, in the driver's seat, finally reached for his own weapon. Caleb didn't turn his head. 2 fingers. On the wheel. Now, the guard's hands went to the wheel. 40 seconds passed. Then the road filled with sound. 2 Greenwich PD cruisers came in from the south. 2 more came in from the north. Pemberton had blocked both ends of the road. The remaining 2 attackers understood the math, dropped their weapons on the asphalt, and laced their fingers behind their heads. Vivian stepped out of the chase vehicle at the head of the backup column. Khaki jacket, no weapon in her hands, the kind of posture that needed no weapon. She walked to the SUV and opened the rear door. Eleanor sat up, smoothed her white hair, and said, very calmly, "Mr. Reed has a steady hand." Vivian turned and looked at Caleb. He was already standing beside the wheel well, weapon lowered. There was a smear of road dirt across the elbow of his jacket from where he had rolled. She did not say thank you. She nodded once. It was a slow nod, and a deep one. The nod of someone who knows that the person across from her has just kept the entire shape of her life intact. The Greenwich officers cuffed the 4 attackers. One of them lost his balaclava in the process. Vivian recognized the face instantly. He had worked private security for Mercer Holdings 2 years earlier. They returned to the estate. The board reconvened in the main meeting room at 9. Eleanor took her chair at the head of the walnut table. Marcus was brought into the room flanked by 2 officers. He tried to smile. "This is a misunderstanding. I had no knowledge of." Vivian set Don's thumb drive on the table. Pemberton opened a laptop and put the screen on the wall. Contracts, emails, wire transfers, a 3-month-old message exchange between Marcus and Victor Mercer, planning what the messages called the incident at the gala route. Marcus's face lost color. He turned to Caleb. "You think you've won? You're a janitor with..." "Master Sergeant," Caleb said quietly. 2 bronze stars. That isn't the point, Marcus. The point is that she trusted Don. He trusted me. You bet against the quiet people in the room. That's why you lost." Eleanor stood up. "Marcus Bryant, you are terminated effective immediately. Mr. Pemberton will forward the full file to the FBI. Greenwich PD will escort you off the property." He was let out. Nobody watched him go. Eleanor turned to Caleb. She put one hand lightly on his forearm. "Thank you, Mr. Reed. Just doing the job, ma'am." She smiled. That's what the real ones always say. That afternoon, Caleb sat in Vivian's office. Military history books lined the walls. A black and white photograph of her father in marine dress blues sat on a shelf behind her desk. She set a contract on the table between them. The position was Director of Principal Protection, equal in rank to her senior staff. Salary, $280,000 a year, full family medical, and a Whitmore Foundation educational endowment. In Lily's name, from elementary school through college. Caleb read it. He set it down. This is too much. It is exactly market rate for a former Ranger MACP instructor running a principal detail. The board knows. They always know how to read what isn't written. He sat quietly. You don't have to take it, she said. But before you decide, I want to know one thing. Why did you stop? He looked at the window for a long moment. Outside, the wind was moving the red maples. My wife found a lump. Stage 3 by the time they caught it. My unit was deploying. I had a choice. The silence stretched. She lived another 4 years. I never regretted the choice. After she passed, I didn't go back, because Lily had already lost one parent. I wasn't going to risk her losing the other one. Vivian didn't say anything for almost a full minute. This job stays domestic, she finally said. Continental U.S. only. You're home every night by 7. I am writing that condition into the contract. He looked up at her. She looked back. There was no declaration in either face. There was no long smile. There was only the moment of two people acknowledging that the foundation of something was being poured, and neither one of them had to name it yet. He picked up the pen and signed. In a holding cell in Greenwich PD a few hours later, Marcus Bryant sat in an orange jumpsuit and stared at the wall. The cell door opened. A man was led in across the hallway, also in orange. Victor Mercer. The FBI had picked him up at his Manhattan office an hour earlier, after Pemberton's full file had hit the federal docket. The two men looked at each other through the bars for 2 seconds. Neither said anything. The door closed. Back at the estate, Don Walsh was summoned to Vivian's office. Eleanor formally dissolved the original non-disclosure agreement, gave him a substantial bonus and a raise, and asked him to keep his position. He stepped out into the hallway, walked to an empty side room, and called his wife. Honey, the insurance. We're okay. We are going to be okay. He pressed the phone against his forehead for a long moment and cried into the sleeve of his shirt without making a sound. At the end of the day, Caleb stood in the gravel parking lot. His old Ford F-150 looked very small beside the row of black sedans. He looked at it, smiled with the corner of his mouth, and opened the door. Vivian came down the path before he turned the key. She set a small envelope on the windshield. For Lily. Eleanor insisted. He opened it. Inside was a stiff white invitation to a children's reading program at the Whitmore Foundation Library that weekend. Eleanor had signed it by hand. She'll love this. I thought she might. She stepped back half a step. He nodded, climbed into the truck, and pulled out of the lot. She watched the taillights until they cleared the gate. On Saturday morning, the children's reading room of the Whitmore Foundation Library was warm with sunlight from the tall east windows. The shelves were low. The floor was polished oak. A rug in soft colors covered most of it. 20 children sat in a half circle. Lily Reed sat near the middle of the half circle, with her well-worn copy of Charlotte's Web open in her lap. Her gray eyes were bright. Caleb leaned against a shelf at the back of the room, his hands in the pockets of a flannel shirt that was newer than the one he had worn to the tryout but still flannel. Vivian stood 2 paces from him against the same shelf. They both watched the children. When Lily's turn came, she read clearly and slowly, the way a child reads who has been read to since before she could remember. You have been my friend. That in itself is a tremendous thing. She looked up from the page, found her father in the back, and smiled. He gave her a small nod and smiled back. She has your eyes, Vivian said quietly. She did not turn her head. And her mother's everything else. Vivian nodded. A woman in a navy cashmere coat passed them on her way to the children's section, recognized Vivian, and gave a small, polite hello. Miss Hale, Mrs. Crane. The woman glanced briefly at Caleb, then at Lily, and then offered the kind of polite half-smile that asks questions without asking them. Vivian did not explain. The woman moved on. When the reading hour ended, the children clapped for each reader. Lily came across the room in 3 quick steps and wrapped her arms around her father's leg. Then she looked up at the tall, well-dressed woman beside him. Are you Daddy's friend? Vivian crouched until her eyes were level with the child's. I work with your dad. He's very good at his job. Lily considered this, then said, with the gravity of a judge, he's good at everything. Except cooking pasta. Vivian laughed. It was the first real laugh in 2 days. Caleb's face flushed. That was one time, out on the front lawn of the library, Lily ran off to chase a yellow butterfly with 2 girls from the reading group. Caleb and Vivian sat on a stone bench in the late autumn light, a respectful distance between them. My father used to take me to a library on Saturdays, Vivian said. After he died, I didn't come back to one for 15 years. Caleb didn't answer. He just watched her face. Today's the first time. He nodded slowly. Then thank you for coming. She looked at him. He looked at her. A single red maple leaf drifted down from above and settled on the seat between them. They both saw it at the same time. Vivian reached over and picked it up. She held it in her palm. Out on the lawn, Lily laughed and turned a circle in the grass. The afternoon light caught her hair and made it gold. 6 months later, on the first warm Saturday of spring, the front yard of Caleb Reed's new house held an apple tree, a young maple, a strip of green grass, and a covered porch wide enough for a wooden swing. The house was not large. It was 2 stories of weathered cedar shingle with a yellow door. It was a home that had been chosen and not bought as an investment. Caleb sat on the porch swing with the same paperback copy of Charlotte's Web open in his lap. Lily had grown about an inch since the autumn. She sat beside him, her head against his shoulder. She was the one reading aloud now. Wilbur never forgot Charlotte. Although he loved her children and grandchildren dearly, none of the new spiders ever quite took her place in his heart. It is not often that someone comes along who is a true friend and a good writer. Charlotte was both. Lily looked up. Daddy, do you think Mommy would have liked this part? He kissed the crown of her head. She read it to you when you were 3. You don't remember, but she did. Then she liked it. A dark sedan turned into the gravel drive. Vivian Hale stepped out, a wicker basket over one arm, bread under a white cloth, a bottle of red wine. She didn't knock. She had stopped knocking some months ago. She walked up onto the porch and sat at the far end of the swing. Lily looked up at her. Are you staying for dinner? If your dad is cooking, I'm staying. If you are cooking, I'm staying longer. Lily laughed, hugged the book to her chest, and ran inside. He's making pasta again, she called back through the screen door. It's better now, Caleb called after her. I learned. The screen door clapped shut. For a moment, Caleb and Vivian sat with the sound of the kitchen radio coming through the window. The sun was lowering behind the young maple. The light came in across the porch railing and laid itself in a long, warm line. Vivian set the basket down beside her foot. She didn't look at him. Eleanor asked whether you'd consider expanding the role. Head of the estate's full protection division. More responsibility. Same hours. What did you tell her? I told her you'd think about it. With your daughter? He nodded, slowly. Then I'll think about it. With my daughter. The silence settled. Without looking, Vivian's hand moved a 1/4 inch across the wood of the swing seat. The back of her fingers brushed the back of his hand. Once. Light. He didn't move his hand. She didn't move hers. They both kept looking at the yard. Inside, Lily was singing softly to herself, a tune from her book. The kettle began to whistle. Vivian said very quietly, It's a good house, Caleb. He watched the young maple bend slightly in the evening wind. It's becoming one. The sun finished going down behind the tree. The porch light came on by itself. Neither of them moved. Their hands stayed where they were. Nobody named what was happening. Nobody needed to. Neither of them had been looking.